2, and go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Emily LaBelle-Lucchese, and I am here with Tori Telfer, who is the author of Lady Killers, and her brand new book is Confident Women. Now, if you would like to order these books, if you have not, there's a blue button at the bottom of your screen that will take you to Barbara's Bookstore. If you use the code EVENT, you get 10% off. There's free shipping. I think you got to spend $25, so I recommend you go ahead and get both of these in order to get your cart to that number. My bio is in the chat, so you can read that if you're wondering who I am and what I've written. I'm a journalist and author, as is Tori, and I'm really excited about her second book, and I'm ready to dive in with questions. If you have questions, please go to the Ask a Question button here and ask your question, and I will incorporate them into the discussion. And please let us know where you're joining us from, and we'll be happy to make your acquaintance. So, Tori, let's get started.
Yeah.
I love this book. This took you years. You've been working on this for a really long time. What inspired? Lady Killers was about female serial killers. What inspired you to do Confident Women?
Well, I knew I wanted to do female criminals still. I definitely felt like I hadn't been tapped out after Lady Killers, but I was a little bit tired of researching and writing about murders, so many murders, because my first book is about female serial killers, so a lot of death. So I was looking around at different categories of female criminals, and I can't remember how exactly I stumbled on female con artists, but I remember just feeling like, wait a minute, no one's done like a compendium of them. Like no one's really, there are some books on individual con artists, female con artists, and then there are many books on the con artist where women get, a paragraph in chapter 8. And I was just like, I feel like there's more here. So I remember just being really super excited when I thought of the idea, which is not like a groundbreaking idea, but I just felt like, oh my gosh, here's such an opportunity. And these stories are so interesting. And I have to say it was a really fun book to write, even though there is a lot of very serious stuff that happens in it. Compared to Lady Killers, I just had so much fun, and I kept wishing I had gotten, a 3-book deal to write Confident 2 and 3.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I should mention to everyone joining us, Tori and I today are having white wine for the occasion. We are having Pouilly Fumé in honor of the first chapter on Jean Saint-Remy, who was in a swindle involving Marie Antoinette. And so, which is just a great way to think about the book, because you go all over history and around the world, really, too. So, by the way, everyone, if you're looking to pair a beverage with this book, you can join us with white wine. If you have any rum in the house, I recommend that to pair with Loretta J. Williams, everybody's fake Cuban. You can also do a mojito. And then also for the tragedians, a cava in honor of Tanya Head, the Spaniard who said she was at 9/11. So you span all this history. How do you get deep into these stories? How do you find your ideas? And then how do you get deep into it?
Well, I guess I'll start with the frustrating thing, which is I always have this nagging sense that I could have done more. Like for Jean Saint-Remy, who Emily just mentioned, the French woman who, sorry, that's my baby crying in the background. I can hear he just bumped his head. He's okay. He's not alone. So she, her swindle, like, legitimately contributed to some of the French Revolution. So what do I do when I write that chapter? Do I have to read everything that's out there about the French Revolution? Like how much, like I have to cut myself off somewhere because this is a 13 chapter book and each chapter is on a different woman. So I can't dedicate 5 years of my life just to the French Revolution, you know, just have the correct context within which to place this woman. So I don't have it easy. Like it's just a balancing act for every chapter where it's like, I'm trying to get the cultural context as best I can. Don't worry, I'm not looking up French Revolution on Wikipedia and just moving on. I'm trying to learn and place these women in their time and place with the nagging sense of like, this book is due in 9 months. At some point I have to move on. As far as how I find the women, I do a lot of searching in online newspaper archives. And I mean, some of the women in this book I knew I was going to include because they are more famous. So like the fake Anastasia is the women who pretended to be Anastasia.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't discover them. Everyone knows about them. But I was like, ooh, I think I want to write about all of them at once instead of just focusing on one. Other women in the book are more obscure. So those I did find by looking through newspaper archives, looking in specific decades for con women, you know, using specific keywords. It really depended on the woman. I hope that's not a cop-out answer, but like the resources I used really depended on the woman because it depended on the time and place where I needed to be. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Which, by the way, hello to Cordelia in Washington, Laura in Santa Fe, and 2 Chicagoans, Georgette and Lisa. So welcome. Tori is actually originally from Chicago area, which is where I am now. The Anastasias. Oh, they fascinated me. When I got to that point, I was actually really excited to see that you had done them because I really wanted to spend time on that. Okay. They're fascinating, but all the con women are fascinating. Why do you think we're fascinated by con women? Like, what's the draw?
I think a lot of reasons. What would I pick as the main one? I think there is something to be said for the fact that they do all these things that we just know we don't have the nerve to do, but we maybe have a little bit of interest in doing, like pretending to be someone else, saying you're a princess. You know, these are things that are kind of, we do as children, we daydream about. They're not as far removed from everyday human experience as like a serial killer, you know, thank God. So I think there is something there to the appeal where we're kind of like, ooh, she's a bolder version of me. But also they do crazy things, you know, like these women just do wacky, extreme, weird things. And when you look at all the different types of crimes we have in a society, this is just one of the more interesting ones. Like, it's not really that interesting to pickpocket maybe or sell drugs. But to say that you're the Russian princess who people suspect was gunned down by Bolshevik bullets, you know, like that's interesting, like that. Interesting crime. So I think we are really drawn into those stories because we know there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. We know they're going to be playing a lot of different characters. Maybe it's for the same reason we like to watch those stand-up specials where like Robin Williams plays, you know, 50 different characters. Yeah. I just thought of it. You know, it's like we know we're going to get to see someone do a lot of different techniques.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way you organize the book because you do it where you go through, you have them by the glitterati, the people who want the money, they want the goods, the seers, meaning the people who use, like they say, you know, spiritual, talking to the dead, things like that. The fabulous, which include the Anastasias, and then the drifters, which includes my favorite fake Cuban, Loretta J. Williams. And she's out all the way in 1842. But I love the way you set up each chapter where you give all their aliases first.
Oh, thanks.
And it's so interesting to me because I think maybe one of the lures is how some of these women just move and reinvent themselves. And it's like they have no fear in that regard. They're just not afraid to restart their lives.
Right. And that's a kind of a fantasy. Like, I'm sure we've all had moments where like, oh, it would just be easier if I could get a blank slate, you know, let everything from my past go, get out of a crumbling apartment and just start over in a new city. That's like a cliche thing to talk about. And these women did it multiple times in a lifetime.
And that's just, it's like amazing to me. There's this like boldness and this like fear that they don't have. And I don't know, there's a couple times where you kind of cheer for some of them where they're on a getaway and then you're like, why am I cheering? Who do you think is the most dangerous con woman in this book?
Definitely the last chapter. I don't know why I put the scariest stuff in the last chapter. It made the most sense at the time, but recently someone was like, that was a scary way to end the book. And I was like, sorry. But her name is Shante Kimes, one of her names, one of her many, many, many names. And she is the rare example of a con woman who murdered. So she is actually, you can find her on a Wikipedia list of serial killers. But I think if I was going to pick, obviously I did pick, I put her in the con woman book because she was such a grifter, such a liar, such a reinventor. But she took things so far, and she had a pathological need to control. And so if someone was threatening to break through her control or her persona or whatever, she did end up killing people, multiple people. So she was definitely the one. Like, if there's one woman in this book you want to avoid, it's her.
So everyone, I'm on page 264, and she writes out list of rules for her maids, which is amazing, because, you know, it's I don't know. So these maids in themselves have been conned, right? She goes to foreign country, she lures them in, and then she pretty much reduces them, enslaves them. So she, and in return for the privilege of being, you say Shante, Kimes's maid, she expected ironclad obedience and total silence. To achieve this, she wrote pages and pages of rules in terrifying caps locks. Quote, if you pay attention to the family and you don't go to the door and you don't answer the telephone for any reason, don't do these things, then everything is going to be very beautiful and you are going to have a very happy life. If you don't pay attention, it is going to be a hell for you. She also wrote instructions for Kenny's tutors and babysitters, telling them to keep an Orwellian eye on the girls. One of her instructions read, maid, control, 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 control.
And that's all in caps, capital letters, FYI. It's terrifying, right?
It's amazing. It's like, meanwhile, like, I'm afraid to like confront the mailman about like some misdelivered mail.
Control.
I need to like write out a letter in all caps and be like, if you deliver the mail,
it will be
properly. It'll be a very happy life.
Yeah, she's terrifying. And there are multiple quotes from FBI agents or people who encountered her that are saying like, well, there's a quote where someone's like, the best female con artist I've ever seen. All these women always got weird compliments. And then there are other quotes that are like the devil in human form, basically, like the most evil woman I've ever met.
So do you think would most of these women find justice?
It like in the, in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm just like looking over my chapter. Most of them ended up in prison at some point. The ones who got away, Roxy Ann Rice, who was a teenager when she committed her con. Well, she actually did do a little bit of jail time for her con. Yeah, there are only a couple who really, truly like vanish into the sunset without ever doing time in the system. Some of them do end up like Shante, the woman that we were just talking about, the really scary one. She ended up with a life sentence and she passed away in prison. But Yeah, so a couple of them do end up with a life sentence, but more often they get a shorter sentence. Like there's a woman in my book who is currently serving out a 10-year sentence. There's another woman in my book who got a life sentence in China, but it's been commuted and she's getting out in 2035, which is still a really long sentence. But I would say, yeah, most of them do end up getting caught. But that's the thing. It's like the really good ones, I'm sure, didn't get caught, but I'll never be able to write about them because they'll never get caught. Like they have to get caught for people like you and I to, eventually learn about them.
Yeah. Well, you would think of like someone like Tanya Head, who pretended she was at 9/11. Was there really there was no way to put her, she didn't steal money. She was just a bad person.
Right. I don't think you could have gotten her for a crime. She didn't steal any money. She lied, but unless you're, perjuring yourself or something, it's legal to lie. Like I could lie to you right now and like, what are you going to do? Like drag me into court? So yeah, she did get away. She pretended to be a 9/11 survivor for a long time and very effectively. And she was actually uncovered when the New York Times was like, we want to do a story on this amazing survivor. And she just kept getting more and more weird. And she kept saying like, they're harassing me. Like the poor journalist would be like, so what was your husband's last name? And she'd be like, you are persecuting me. How dare you make me my trauma? And he was like, sorry, I just need to know your husband's last name that you say died in the North Tower. And this exposed her. But you're right. Like she hadn't done anything criminal. And so really just what happened to her is all her friends turned on her with shock and she vanished. And she's still around. People saw her in New York a couple years. So she was exposed, I think, in 2007. And then a couple years later, someone saw her in New York and caught her on film doing like the paparazzi thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she wouldn't talk. She's never apologized. She's never explained herself. So she could still be in New York, but she didn't get away.
I was really fascinated by that. And everyone, you will find that under the chapter on the tragedies, which is under the fabulous. And it's, these people who are attaching themselves to real life tragedies for, I guess, whatever they feel kind of social capital they get from it. But so some of the women who are still in prison, do you contact them?
Tried. Yeah. So I think only 2 women in my book are still in prison. One of them is I talked to her son. She didn't want to talk to me. He passed along the message from me and so I haven't communicated with her, but my understanding is she didn't want to talk to me. But I spoke to 2 of her sons, actually. The other woman is in China and I worked with a translator on that chapter and I was like, how do I contact her? And the translator tried and was unable. And there's just some weirdness there with just navigating another country's legal system is just difficult. I mean, navigating our own legal system, I do find very confusing, but we couldn't reach her. Is anyone else still in prison? No. So I did talk to one real con artist over Facebook Messenger, but I decided not to include her in the book actually, because ultimately I was like, A, I sort of don't want to deal with her.
Yeah.
Really, she was a lot to deal with. And B, I didn't think her story there was enough there, even though she told me that Roman Polanski is making a film about her life. So
of course.
I leave it to him.
Of course he is.
I know.
Wow. So Allison in the chat says she can't wait to read this. And I mean, just go ahead and block out time. It's okay to take a weekend. It's okay to cancel plans. We're in a pandemic, so
use me as an excuse if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, we're not supposed to be getting together anyway. And I think too, that's what I loved about this book is going to China, going to the UK, going all around Europe with the Anastasias, all around the US, with the Grifters in particular. And I loved that because like I said, we're in a pandemic and with each chapter we go into a different time and place and it's such an escape from the world. it was really enjoyable. Let me ask, Tori, this is a very odd question, but do you remember the movie, the book Misery, by Stephen King? And it's a
movie.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you saw the movie. Okay, and so for those of you who don't know it, it's about an author. He gets into an accident, and the person who finds him, it happens to be an obsessed fan of his novels, his series, and she brings him into her home, and she's getting him back to health, and she also forces him to write. And then she forces him, when she finds out he was going to kill off her favorite character, she like makes him go back on that. If you could force another author to write,
Okay.
if you could go all misery on someone, who would it be? And you can do multiple. I'm open to that.
Cool.
Who would it be and why?
Do they have to be alive today?
Oh, they do?
Do they?
No, I mean, like, we can time machine it. So,
So this author, I would never, ever break her knees with a sledgehammer like Kathy Bates does in Misery, in a scene that scarred me to this day. But
I'm scarred too.
That movie is so scary. But I would like more books. And this is kind of an innocent question, or this is an innocent answer to a diabolical question. But my comfort books are the Anne of Green Gables series by Ellen.
Oh, yeah.
I have read that series as like a young girl, tween. I read it all. There are 8 of them, and then there are spin-off books, and I read them all multiple times. And I just reread them on maternity leave, and they were so comforting. But there aren't enough. There aren't enough LM. Sure, you take Anne through like her kids are grown and getting married, but I want more. So I would politely ask her to go like write more books, like fill in gaps in Anne's life, and maybe do Anne as an old woman. Like I really can't. I could read a million of those books.
That is so kind. I love it. You would like bring her snacks.
Yeah.
And
I would suggest firmly that she write more and fast, but I would bring her snacks and tea.
So those were influential books for you. What were you like as a young reader? What were you like, as an aspiring writer as a kid? When did you kind of follow this path, I guess, is what I would be asking.
I was a big reader. I was homeschooled, so I read kind of like the homeschool kid books, like the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lord of the Rings, like a lot of series. I read Harry Potter, even though I'm a little older than the kids who grew up with Harry Potter. But, and then, Anne of Green Gables, Little House on the Prairie, those are the big ones. But in terms of my writing, when I think back, I always wrote about dark subjects. Like I had this story I was really proud of as a 6th grader about someone who turns into a werewolf, plot twist. And I actually remember getting I said I was homeschooled, but I went to school for middle school. So that's when I wrote this. And I got a bad grade on it. Like, I don't know if it was an F, but it was maybe like a C because I hadn't formatted it. She wanted me to format it a certain way. And I had been swept away by my muse. I no longer like deal with muse today because like I have bills to pay, but back then I was swept away by my muse and I forgot to read the part that was like use Times New Roman, size 12. And so I got a bad grade and I just remember feeling like, but this was such a good story. Like you didn't even read it. So I, as a young writer, and then like the other things I wrote about, I was thinking about this a lot lately because I'm a pastor's kid and everyone thinks that's so weird that I'm a true crime writer and a pastor's kid. But to me, it's like, it makes so much sense. Like, have you ever read the book of Revelation? Like, very natural pairing, like grew up on Good and Evil, writes about true crime. Like, so even, even
I see that.
Right? So like I wrote a essay about this really dramatic point of time in Martin Luther, like when Martin Luther was on trial. And that was like the first time I ever won an award for my writing. And in retrospect, I think that also is like has some of the themes I'm interested in today, just like the courtroom drama and like the person, like the persecuted person standing up and dramatically declaring. And so, yes, I think I've always kind of been interested in the same themes, like good and evil, what is evil, darkness. And I was only, though, until I was like a young freelancer that I started explicitly writing true crime, started writing about female serial killers. But before that, it was a lot of fiction about really creepy things and ghosts. And so there's a pretty distinct through line if you look back.
Yeah. But I also think of you as writing women's stories. Like you know, because I write women's history, I write women's stories. And what I love about your work, which, by the way, everybody, if you use that green button at the bottom of your page, you can get 10% off by using the code EVENT at Barbara's Bookstore. That what I love about your work is that, particularly, you know, with Lady Killers, I felt like you really kind of combated this like old stereotype from like the Victorian era that women aren't capable of these types of things, like this one-dimensional notion that when women do something bad, that they're no longer feminine. Mm-hmm. And so it's same with confident women, that women would be driven by lust or money. And so I think of you is both a true crime writer, but also is really having this focus on women's stories. I like that too, that you make these characters complex. They're not just con women. Mm-hmm. They're women sometimes who have to survive. What is your intention when you write, when you dig into their backstory? What is your motivation to focus on them as complex characters and not just con women?
Well, I really think that I think that humans are just interesting, and specifically like any crime, like crime is interesting and multifaceted. Even like a simple drug deal or something that we might think is like banal and happens all the time. If you really look into who the drug dealer is and who the addict is and how they got there, it's all really interesting. So I think to boil down these stories to what technical type of crime the person was accused of is just not that interesting and not really fair. As far as these women, like, I don't like, how do I want to say this? Like, these are stories about women, but there's also stories about humans. And sometimes I feel like in an attempt to like empower women, actually stories about women get really flattened. Like a lot of, you know, well-meaning books out there with titles like The Baddest Broads Ever.
Yeah.
And they're just like really short paragraphs where it's like, Cleopatra was a cool queen and like Marie Curie invented stuff. And fine, but I always think about like the size of biographies of our famous men. Like, how big are Winston Churchill's biographies? Like this, like like even like bad men, like Hitler's biographies are massive. You know, like Napoleon, good, bad, or in the middle. You know, male figures from history get a lot of intense attention, and no one questions that because it's history and we see it as worthy. And so, like, when I'm writing these books, even though they might look like encyclopedias, because, like, I don't know if the subtitle makes it sound like an encyclopedia. Like, each of my books has multiple stories packed into it. I really don't want it to read like a brief overview of con women or a brief overview of female serial killers. I want like an in-depth 14 or 13 in-depth looks at these humans and how they got there. So I do have a lot invested in showing them as multifaceted and like going into their childhood as much as I can and all of that, because I just think, and I don't even see that as, I think that's just sort of naturally feminist, but I don't even see that as like I don't need a hashtag for that. Like, it's just like worthy, like history that happens to be about women is worthy of attention too. And sometimes I feel like we try to make it so special and unique that we end up undercutting the cause. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. And you know what? I appreciate Georgette's comments, because I feel like you're right. Like Winston Churchill there's a shelf full of him. And women, unless, you were a major saint like Eleanor Roosevelt or a major singer, it's really hard to get those gray areas. And so when you sell women's history, it's like you're working, to prove that it's worthy. And that can be really frustrating. And so that's what I just love, because you're finding these stories. I didn't know about so many.
Oh, good.
The only ones I had ever heard of was briefly about the 9/11 faker and Anastasia's, but I only knew the Anastasia's existed. I didn't have any information. And like I looked, the first chapter, I was like, how did I not know this? Like, how did I never know? Because like you said, she was so influential in starting these rumors that fueled the hostility that people already had towards Marie Antoinette. How is this not, like, we'll hear about generals and, battle leaders, but these people are not included.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. So I love that you're bringing out these people from the shadows.
Thank you. I think that some of the reasons that these stories, specifically the ones in my book, get forgotten is because female con artists they're not afraid to use things that seem silly or frivolous to achieve their nefarious ways. And so this woman that we're talking about who, kind of like helped to, not kind of, she did help to bring down Marie Antoinette. That wasn't her intention. Her con, if you just like look at the keywords, it seems silly. Oh my gosh. Hello, Daisy.
This is Daisy Lucchese. Her tongue is out, but she's into women's history.
I can tell. She popped right up when we started talking about it. So like this woman, her con involved a diamond necklace, and it involved like a sexy little romp in the garden, like a silly little like someone pretended to be the queen and wore a white dress and handed someone else a rose. And like on the surface, maybe these don't seem serious when you compare them to Napoleon Bonaparte, a diamond necklace, who cares? So I think that is why they get dismissed, because they do seem frivolous in a way. But like if you give them a little time and you dig deeper, you see that they have, like, this woman's trial was disastrous for Marie Antoinette, because she basically convinced France that Marie Antoinette had either purchased this crazily expensive diamond necklace, or was having an affair with this cardinal, or was just somehow entangled in it. And the fact that this con woman managed to drag Marie Antoinette's name into it, even though this was a case where Marie Antoinette did nothing wrong and was not involved at all, the fact that this woman managed to bring her name into the narrative at all damaged her reputation. Like, it's hard to overstate how much it damaged it. I mean, you saw how Marie Antoinette ended up, but people were selling like pornographic plates in the street, like trinkets with like Marie Antoinette. It was very influential. So anyway, I'm getting lost in the weeds, but my point is, I think that if you don't take some time to see how influential these women could be, you could dismiss them, because you could say, okay, it's about a diamond necklace, but what about the wars? And what about the economy?
I see. I love that. I couldn't believe I didn't know this, which is why, Tori, my answer to the misery question is you.
That's excellent screenshot.
And I thought about it because you're taller than me.
Uh-oh.
But I'm heftier and I'm scrappier, and I think I could be scary. But I have ideas, and so anyway, you would be my misery. Yeah. So
flattered, but I don't know what to do next time we have coffee together. Maybe in a public space.
Oh no, totally. I won't have equipment in my car at all. But that leads me to my next
Genius.
That leads me to my next question. I like your comment, Deb. Sometimes when you write, I write women's history, which I tend to write about victims. You write true crime. Now and then you'll be in a social situation and people will be like, what are you working on? Mm-hmm. And then you tell them and you get wrapped up into it. And then you're the creepy one. Does that ever happen to you?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Just sorry.
I have some conversations where I see the look pass on people's face. Yeah. I actually had a conversation the other day, and Allison in the chat will appreciate this, where with two people who it turned out didn't know who John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer, was. So then I was like, now do I have to go through who he was? Because that's really going to kill the mood. So yeah, I have a lot of conversations where I have to tone it down.
And then when you bring up the clown thing, it's like you invented it and you're the weirdo.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of interesting. Stop. We're on a call. Excuse us. Very often when you research something, history is so much more stranger than fiction. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't make it up if you tried. But people, think that you did, and they attribute it to you. Mm-hmm. Let me ask, which one of these con women, because they are so, truth is stranger than fiction. Which one of these women sticks with you the most?
I think the one that haunts me the most, that I find maybe saddest, is Bonnie Lee Bakley. Yeah. She married Robert Blake, so I always mix up their last names. So she is famous for being a murder victim. She's kind of a famous true crime story. Like, you can find plenty of true crime podcasts about her, but she was also a con woman, which I think is less known. And her story is just, in a way, kind of a classic, like, girl moves to Hollywood to make it story, but there are all these layers that make it worse and more tragic and more swindly and sadder. So she was kind of a grifter from an early age, and she ran a mail order porn business that was very successful enough for her to buy multiple houses. And it was all, yeah, like she made a lot of money, and those were her main cons. She would pretend to be other people, and she would say she was coming to visit you, but she wasn't. But could you send her bus money? But all through her conning, she really wanted to be famous or the wife of a famous person. And so when she couldn't marry Elvis, and when she couldn't marry Jerry Lee Lewis or Frankie Valli, she tried and tried and tried. She was like a professional. Then she turned her sights on Hollywood, and she started stalking, frankly, celebrities. And she finally got one, Robert Blake, who was at the time this, actor who had been more famous back in the day. Mm-hmm. He was in his 60s and his star was kind of declining. And so she snagged him, and she sort of conned him into marrying her. And we don't know who killed her. She ended up dead in the front seat of their car. Someone shot her. And Robert Blake was tried but found not guilty. And it was a very O.J. Simpson-esque trial. Like, everyone thinks he did it, and he does not look good. But he got off. But then in a civil trial, he was found guilty. Very O.J.-esque. So anyway, her story sticks with me because, it ended so tragically. But also, like, she seemed to see her own ending coming. She told friends and family multiple times that she thought Robert Blake was going to kill her, and in a kind of a matter-of-fact way, like, it's, who really knows what she was thinking. But my read of her is she sort of like understood the stakes of the game she was playing, the fame game and the con game, and just kind of realized how it was going to unfold. And she did end up becoming famous by her death, but she was trashed in the press. Robert Blake's lawyers trashed her in the press and made fun of her for her age and her weight and her cons and her sordid past. And So it's just a really haunting story. And it's, the ending is not happy in any way. Her parents or her family would take $20,000 from the National Enquirer to do an interview about her. Just that kind of thing.
That's sad.
Yeah, sorry, bummer. But that's the one that sticks with me the most.
Let's take a sip, everyone.
For Bonnie Lee.
Okay, so that I see in the comments, Allison had a really interesting comment where she's put serial killers are not interesting. And she's right that we look at how many of these serial killers just passed as normal, right? And that's part of their ability to pass is that we have these stigma ideas of who is a killer and who's not. Many of these women passed as normal, right? And it's their ability to read others and then fit in and not, in some regards, not attract attention. Which one of these ladies do you think was the best at fitting in and passing as normal?
Oh, I think for the one that immediately springs to my mind is Margaret Lydia Burton. She was one of the ones that I scraped out of the archive, so I'm very proud of her chapter. I don't think you can find, there's no other book on her, there's no movie on her, so you have to buy mine. No.
Yeah.
She was, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
She was a real getaway pro in the 1950s, and she had a billion, like 22 aliases, and she just made an art. Her cons themselves weren't that interesting. They were financial cons. So she would work for a doctor's office and convince them to let her do the taxes and scrape money off the top. But what was interesting about her was her repeated getaways. It was like she had it down to a science. Like she and her daughter would move to a city, adopt new names, get a job, buy a house, live this luxe lifestyle. Oops, we got caught, peel out of the city in their getaway car and do it again and again and again. And her daughter this was the life she knew. And when Margaret and her daughter finally got caught, I'm trying to remember her daughter's name, Sheila Joy. Her daughter, so they got caught, and Margaret was eventually the only one who went to trial. Her daughter was released, and her daughter gave this like haunting quote to the newspapers that was like, I just want to get away. I just want to get in a car and drive away from all the curious people, but I'm not as good as it is, mommy. And I was like, her daughter, lifestyle, like she just wants to keep, like, that was her childhood. That was her young adulthood. She just wanted to keep doing that. I've forgotten your original question now.
What's that?
I forgot your original question.
So I feel like that was in that chapter, one of their things was that they would use their money to buy fancy dog breeds.
Yes, they did get it. Yes.
Was it Pomeranians?
Oh, we wish. No, but almost as good. It was Cocker Spaniels.
Oh, that's right.
Expensive Cocker Spaniels.
And then at the end, they were like disposing of Cocker Spaniels, and Daisy stands in solidarity with all the Cocker Spaniels in that show. Yeah. No, she stands in solidarity. That, was interesting, that chapter, because she would really perform kind of that 1950s, 1960s expectation of what a woman was. And she would just like adhere to that and then kind of use it back against people, which so many of these women did, which is so interesting. Please, everyone, if you have a comment, or question, please feel free to add it to the Ask a Question button down at the bottom, and we will be glad to include it. I'm sorry. I see the Farber's Bookstore has encouraged that. What was something in this book that almost kind of you got stuck with, where like it was a challenge for you?
In the book? I can think of a lot of mini challenges. I'm trying to think what's like an interesting one.
Because I remember that the UK one was, and I want to touch on that one because that was insane. With the woman who was in the tragedies, who was using the bombing. I want to say it was was it the Ariana Grande concert bombing that she was using?
Yeah.
To say that she had lost a family member, and she had some issues, huh? How was it researching that chapter? Were you able to get the information you needed?
Yeah, so this chapter was, so I have 3 chapters that are, most of my chapters are on one woman, but then I had 3 chapters that were on multiple women. So the Anastasia imposters I put in one chapter. And this one, I did a chapter on women who co-opt real tragedies to do cons, which is a very common con. And I guarantee you people are doing it right now with coronavirus. So this woman in question, Roxana, she was a Scottish woman who she basically did insurance fraud. Again, like a boring con, really boring. It just involves like filing claims and doctoring receipts. But what made it interesting and horrible was that she said she was at the Manchester Arena bombing, the Grenfell Tower fire, and this terrorist attack on London Bridge. And I don't know if you all remember those, but they happened in the span of like 3 months in, I'm not going to have the year on the top of my head, sometime in the 2000s. I want to say 2001, but 2011. Sorry, this is so unprofessional, but there are too many dates in my book. 2017, more recent.
Wow.
So for her, I talked to the police who caught her. So that was cool. Oh no, do I have I'm back. Am I back?
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. You never left us.
Okay, good. Yeah, I reported that one a little bit out myself because most of the coverage of her was in the tabloids, which is interesting because people hated her, because even though she was kind of this non-entity as a person, like she wasn't, I mean, sorry, that's too mean. Obviously she's a human, but her con was boring. But the claim, the fact that she was pretending to be at these tragedies cut people to the quick and really offended people. And so most of the coverage about her was like in the Daily Mail, which I was like, I can't like rely on this. So I talked to the detectives who, knocked down her door and drove with her in the police car and stuff. So that's fun for me because a lot of my cases are so historical that I cannot talk to anyone who is involved. So I do get a little bit of a thrill when I can do that.
That's what I love about this book, though, is that like these con women, they don't just like happen and exist in a vacuum. Like they have to rely on others. And this young woman, I feel like if memory serves, she was living at home. Mm-hmm. Her bedroom wall was just like papered with receipts because she was trying to keep her con straight, right? And then like, what are the parents up to?
Her dad was dead. So she was not a young woman, actually. She was, she had a couple of marriages or failed relationships. And so she had been conning for a while by then. And she was the caretaker for her mother, who was in her 90s. So I think that the cops suspect that she was also swindling her mother.
Oh, wow.
Or at least like using her mother's information for certain, to route some of these insurance claims. And her mother didn't know. I don't think her mother spoke English. So I think that Roxana was just like making all the calls in that household.
That's always fascinating. Like when you see how, I mean, because there's actually a couple of people in here who kind of have some partners for a while, right? Yeah. Particularly with the spiritualists.
Sure. A lot of wealthy husbands were harmed in the making of these cons.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's really interesting, like how many, particularly too in the glitterati, the specific target on wealthy people is what they're going for. Not that I my heart bleeds for the Carnegies, but it was like such an interesting aspect of it. How did at what point did you realize like that there are different types of con women and that you needed to separate them by type?
I knew there were different types from the beginning, because often cons are separated. Like if you read a book like on like what is a con,
Yeah.
you know, they'll be like the sob story cons and the financial cons. I first organized my book chronologically, and my editor said it wasn't working. And then she was like, what would you think about grouping them by type? And I was like, can I make up my own types? And she said, yes. Because I just thought the typology was a little bit boring.
Yeah.
So the types are totally Tori made up, but you know, they make sense in my head. So
No, I love them.
They're
Now,
not-
here's another. Have you ever been conned?
have I ever been conned?
Yeah.
So I have been conned in very minor ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so nothing that makes me special. Like I had a roommate who I think was a pathological liar, who just, it was one of those relationships where in retrospect, you're like, wait, there's no way any of that was true. But at the time, like, oh, how interesting that celebrity asked you on a date. And I tried, you know.
Yeah.
Naive. This is very minor. I only lost $40, but I did have a very like intense con experience with a guy who conned my boyfriend at the time and I out of the $40 by saying he wove this elaborate story of needing $40 to get a tow truck for his truck, blah, blah, blah. His boss would be mad, blah, 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 something. But he had like construction guy equipment on, like he was in character. He was charming, which after writing this, I am now, it makes sense why he was so easy to talk to. And he swore that he was going to come back the next day and pay us back. So, and of course, initially we were like, oh, this is a con, but then he convinced us. And so I remember my boyfriend getting the $40 from the ATM, and he and I, the con man and I were sitting on the curb and bonding, I thought. And I was like, what does that mean? And we were having a real human moment. And then, of course, he never came back the next day. And at the time, I mean, we were lucky. Like, as you know, people in this book lose, I don't know, someone loses $17 million.
Wow.
We were lucky. But it was kind of hurtful. Like, and my boyfriend especially, because, you know, he had been the one who it was out of his bank account. And like, he was furious that there was just something like,
yes,
you can't do that. Like, that's not right. And of course, he couldn't do it. But it was like a microcon, but it was very effective.
If you've been conned, please add it to the ask a question, and we will offer, solace and solidarity. I have a Chihuahua, not this one. So I'm conned like
every
day in every way, because she's in charge, and we just want her to be happy. At least she doesn't leave notes in all caps. For the maid, control.
Can I answer Laura's question? I'm dying to. Do you see it in the?
Wait, no, I think my questions have frozen. Everybody, I apologize. Please do tell me. Can you tell us the question and then?
So Laura's asking, was there any woman you researched that was just too heinous? And I have an answer, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I can say no more. Just kidding. No, this is actually not a laughing matter. There was a woman I researched that was way too heinous, and more specifically, too recent. Because if you know me, one of the things I like about historical crimes is we get that distance. We get that like everyone involved has passed on. There aren't family members out there who are not willing to be written about. Anyway, but in this book, I decided to do some current cons because it felt like, well, they're still happening. And so there was this woman in the UK who I thought about including, and I started researching and I started reaching out to people for interviews. Her con, and this is very shocking and this is very rare. I mean, this never happens. She had conned someone into dating her, a man into dating her, and she had woven this web of lies about how she was in this like top secret medical experiment, like a experimental treatment. And she had gotten his mom and his sister into the web, and they started believing her. And then she told them, they like mentioned her to another family member, and she sprung on them. This is all happening over the internet, by the way. They never met her. She sprung on them and was like, you have shared confidential medical information, and you're going to spend decades in prison. And
Whoa.
mom and the sister went to a hotel and killed themselves.
What?
I know. I'm sorry. It's so awful. It's so awful. She scared them so badly that was what they thought they had to do. It was a freaking con. I know. And so initially I was like, I should include this because it's so different than everything else. And it kind of like illuminates a really sinister side of conning. This woman was arrested and got a very short sentence, I think, for what she did, and then died in prison of health complications. Anyway, it was just too recent. Like, the family members are still alive, and I started just feeling icky, like reaching out to them, and it didn't feel right, and it was so horrible. But crimes like that are odd because it's like, what's the right thing to do? Like, should none of us ever know that happened? Or, like, obviously the right thing to do isn't to make a really salacious, like 5-part, like Oxygen Channel TV show about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The right thing to do to pretend it never happened. I don't know. But yeah. So Laura, I did feel like it was too heinous to write about and just too real,
Can we get to Cordelia's question? I'm sorry, Cordelia, I forgot that you have to actually press on the ask a question button to see it pop up. Despite the fact that I was told this yesterday, I PhD here, people, PhD. She asked, was there a specific con woman who got you interested in them?
I encountered a couple right when I started researching. So I can't point to one, but I will point to one. There was this. So Emily was mentioning our favorite fake Cuban earlier. And so her Cuban name was Loretta Janetta Velasquez. But this woman, I encountered her as like this glorious figure of Cuban American history.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you can find her very praised in certain circles. So basically, she said that she was a Cuban American citizen who dressed as a man during the Civil War and fought for the Confederacy. So she's used as an example of several things, like women of color in American history, women who are cross-dressing, and female soldiers, like all these different categories you could put her in as an example and like analyze her. But I'm pretty sure none of that is true. And I'm not the only one. She was just a really intense con woman. We don't know where she was born. She could have been born in Cuba. I mean, it's just that she lied about literally everything. And there's very little evidence to prove that she was born in Cuba. I don't believe she spoke Spanish, but she did live back then during the Civil War. Her last name was maybe Williams. We don't really know. She kind of pops onto the historical record as a teenager, getting in a lot of trouble with the law as a sex worker. And then eventually she seems to realize that she can get attention and she can get interviewed and just like sort of become a celebrity if she dresses in a Confederate soldier's uniform and parades around town. And so she does that, and she tells this story of fighting in battle, but she's getting her facts wrong, and it's a really extreme story. And also conveniently, when she's up north, guess which side she says that she fought for.
Right. Yeah.
She said she was Cuban American when that worked for her. She said she was a Confederate when that worked. She said she was Union when that worked. Like, she didn't care about, politics or sides or anything like that. She was really just out for herself. And I found her very interesting because not only was she a con woman during her time, but it's like, I think she's still conning all of us today if you can find her in lists of female soldiers when it's pretty clear that she'd never fought. Like, I'm telling you, her memoir is so outrageous. She's like, I could have killed Lincoln if I had had the chance. Like, sorry, she doesn't say Lincoln, but there's someone she says she could have killed. She heavily suggests that if she had been given control of a troop of Confederate soldiers, then the South would have won.
Over, right? Yes. It
Like,
would have been over. She would have taken care of business.
It was just
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question. To kind of wrap it up, and everybody, if you have your own answer, please add it to the chat. If you were a con woman, what would be your con name? Like, have you given thought to it?
Name. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm going to say like a flower of some. Well, I would have to have multiple. I must be frank.
Yeah, you got to have multiple aliases.
Yeah. But maybe one of them would be like peony. And I would probably keep like, so Tori Telfer, like I have the alliteration. So I'd probably keep that. So like peony or lavender.
Oh, that's so good.
Lavender Loomis.
Yeah.
Street I used to live on.
Oh yeah.
Flower woman and every, petunia.
There should be some sort of formula, like the street you grew up on and the first name of your first grade teacher is your alias.
Street I have one. Street you lived on as a moody middle schooler. Name of your moderator, Emily Eastwood.
Oh, really? I like that.
That's mine.
I like it. I like Laura's Gone Poppy. Yeah. No, I like that. Oh, good, Lisa. Thank you. You are going to love it, Lisa. I promise you. I highly recommend it. And while you're at it, everybody get, I'd use whatever birth certificate I get my hands on to. Deb, you're like a smart thinker. You're doing the practicalities. Also, everybody, I have to point out, when you get Lady Killers, you'll notice that the cover is slightly textured. So, do you like that? And you'll enjoy that. It's a wonderful book. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us. Like I said, 10% off. Use the code EVENT at Barbara's Bookstore. And you're going to love both these books. I highly recommend them. Thank you so much for your time, Tori. And just letting me ask you weird, creepy questions.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who is here.
And Tori's Instagram handles are in the chat if you would like to follow her, as well as Barbara's Bookstore's Instagram handles as well, and Facebook. I don't have any because I'm an old lady, everybody.
I am.
Have a great night. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank